So when I joined the board, Pat Parvin, who I love dearly, was the chair of the board. And I had the privilege of working with him on the board for a few years until there was some transition in leadership, and then I moved into the position of chair for the NBA board. And it, like everything in the church, even like the bankruptcy, if it hadn't been for Pat and others before me to kind of set the stage and prepare the way, then my task would have been more difficult. But Pat and others had done a really good job of kind of setting out and making sense of the call from the church that we, with care, address the issue of the bankruptcy and how we move forward. So as I moved into that role, I took with me everything that we had talked about in previous board meetings, a lot of what Pat and I had spoken about privately about NBA and the bankruptcy, and I took with me the voice of the church. And I recall the church and a General Assembly saying, these are some things that we want you to do as NBA. There had been, because the person who stepped into leadership as president of NBA, initially he was appointed there kind of temporarily and then with a little more permanency, but there had always been this call for us to launch a search for leadership. And there had been this call for a business plan and kind of a roadmap of how we would move forward. So with that in mind, launching a search for new leadership, specifically for the president position, and working on a plan for what NBA could look like was what I always had close by to remind me, because while that was pretty clear that we needed to do that, there were all these other things that were happening that we could not ignore. So it was either, this agency or that agency, or something else with the courts and appeals and all those things that we also had to manage, including having to step into more of a programmatic role as a board with NBA during this time. So shortly after becoming the chair of the board, and probably right after the 2007 General Assembly, then we began embarking on the executive model of the church for searching for president of NBA. And it was a national open search. Again, we followed the protocol. And even the person who had been serving as president of NBA was able to be a candidate in the process. But we followed the process, and so following the process was one thing, but walking with people through the process was another really important piece. So I found myself at times making trips to St. Louis, either a few days before a board meeting or in between board meetings, to sit with the staff and to, as best I could, answer any questions they had about not just the future of the organization, but their future as individuals. But we followed the process, and the result was the hiring of Mark Anderson as president of NBA. With that came some joy, and with it came some pain. Not specifically, the joy was really around calling Mark, and we really celebrated that. The painful part meant that there were those, the person who had been serving as president needed to receive the word from me in person, sitting across the table for him, that no longer would we need his services, and that was really difficult. And again, that visit in the office again with the staff who had also worked with him for a long time to answer questions. Again, not just about the organization, but about them as individuals. So that was the tough part of it. But we came out with an excellent person to serve in the presidency role. And one of the first things I said to Mark was, we need to have a business plan. So he very quickly received the mandate that we as a board felt like we needed to honor the church by, okay, now that we've got a new person or a leadership in place, we need to have a business plan. And so the other thing that we were doing at the same time was doing some board development and beginning to make a shift from being a programmatic board to more of a governance board. So again, there are all these multi-layer of things that seem to be happening at the same time, but not just me, but the board felt like in order to be on task and move forward, that we needed to do some of those things at the same time. So Mark, set out to work on a business plan. He set out to look at the whole of the organization. He looked at staffing. We consulted a lot back and forth. There were, staff changes that were made, and so then with his vision that we could see in the business plan, we as a board just gave him our blessing to move forward. Again, that there was as in the beginning of my serving with the post bankruptcy board. There was always a sense of hope, and that little flicker of hope began to get brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter.